In the Amish church, intimacy is never spoken about as desire, it's spoken about as duty, and that difference shapes a woman's entire married life in ways most outsiders never see. I grew up in a traditional Old Order Amish community in Pennsylvania, where marriage was understood as both a spiritual covenant and a practical partnership. From the time I was a girl, I was taught that closeness between a husband and wife was sacred, but also private to the point of near invisibility. We didn't have conversations about romance the way the outside world does. We had teachings about modesty, obedience, and unity. My name is Eliza, and when I left the community a few years ago, one of the things I had to slowly untangle in my mind was how intimacy had been defined for me, not through personal feeling, but through Ordnung, the unwritten church rules that guide daily life. Outsiders often assume Amish marriages are either cold and arranged or else sweet and idyllic. The reality sits somewhere much quieter in between. Intimacy exists, of course. Children wouldn't be born otherwise. But the way it is structured, discussed, and emotionally experienced follows a set of expectations that can feel surprising if you didn't grow up inside them. One of the first rules, though it was never written down, was that intimacy belonged only to marriage and never to courtship. During my teenage years, when I was dating my future husband, we spent time together almost entirely in group settings. Sunday singings, buggy rides with others nearby, visiting at family homes. Physical closeness was limited to what could be seen as modest, holding hands if you were already committed, sitting close during a buggy ride after engagement. I remember one winter evening after we were engaged. We were sitting in his parents' living room, both of us aware that our wedding was only months away. There was affection between us, curiosity too, but the space around us felt watched, even without anyone looking directly. His mother was quilting in the corner. His younger siblings were playing on the floor. The expectation was clear. Emotional closeness could grow, but physical intimacy had to wait completely. That waiting wasn't framed as restriction, it was framed as protection of purity, of spiritual focus, of community standards. Another rule that shaped married life was the understanding that intimacy was not discussed openly, even between women. After my wedding, older married women gave me practical advice: how to manage a household, how to stretch food through winter, how to support my husband's work. But when it came to the private side of marriage, guidance was indirect, almost coded. I recall one conversation with an older aunt a week before my wedding. We were hanging laundry outside, the sheets snapping in the wind. She said very calmly, "Marriage asks for closeness even when you're tired. Remember that unity matters more than comfort." That was all. No details, no emotional framing, just the expectation that intimacy was part of being a good wife, regardless of personal mood. For many women, that teaching fostered a sense of responsibility more than mutual exploration. A third rule revolved around modesty, even within marriage. Clothing expectations didn't disappear behind closed doors. Nightwear was simple, functional, and modest. The idea was that physical attraction should not become a source of vanity or pride. Beauty, we were taught, could lead to temptation, even between spouses, if it encouraged ego instead of humility. I remember sewing my own nightgowns after marriage. Plain cotton, high neckline, long sleeves. It wasn't that husbands and wives felt no attraction. It was that attraction wasn't meant to be cultivated visually. Emotional and spiritual unity were supposed to lead, not physical display. There was also an unspoken rhythm to intimacy shaped by labor. Amish life is physically demanding: farm work, pregnancies, cooking for large families, laundry without machines. Exhaustion was constant, yet the expectation remained that marital closeness should be maintained without complaint. One night stands out in my memory. I had spent the entire day canning vegetables with my sisters-in-law, then cooking supper for hired hands. By the time we finished evening prayers, my body ached. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, unlacing my shoes slowly, feeling the weight of tiredness. My husband was kind, never forceful, but the understanding lingered in the air that intimacy was part of maintaining harmony. I didn't feel resentment. I felt obligation, mixed with care. That emotional blend is hard to explain unless you've lived it. Another surprising rule was the absence of birth control. Children were viewed as blessings given by God's timing, not human planning. This belief shaped intimacy profoundly because it tied physical closeness directly to the possibility of pregnancy at all times. I watched women navigate this reality in different ways. Some embraced it fully, joyful in large families. Others carried quiet fatigue, but openly wishing to space or limit children was rarely voiced. Doing so could be interpreted as resisting God's will. Community pressure around intimacy was never loud. No one monitored marriages directly. Instead, enforcement came through sermons about marital duty, through marriage counseling with ministers, through older women's advice. I remember a sermon given not long after my wedding. The bishop spoke about cold marriages as spiritual weaknesses. He never described intimacy explicitly, but everyone understood what he meant. A wife who withheld closeness, or a husband who neglected it, was seen as allowing distance to grow where unity should live. That kind of teaching didn't feel like coercion, it felt like moral guidance, but it shaped how couples navigated private struggles, often silently. Emotionally, the system affected women differently. Some found comfort in its structure. Intimacy was steady, predictable, tied to commitment rather than emotional fluctuation. There was security in that. Others, myself included, sometimes felt a quiet disconnect between physical closeness and emotional expression. Love existed, but it wasn't always verbalized or explored deeply. Vulnerability wasn't our community's strong language. I remember wishing early in my marriage that I could talk openly with my husband about fears, insecurities, even desires. But neither of us had been raised to speak that way. Intimacy happened physically, yet emotional articulation lagged behind. Still, it's important to say that many Amish women experience genuine peace within this structure. The predictability, the shared faith, the absence of outside pressures, these create a stable environment where intimacy feels safe rather than confusing. I had friends who felt deeply loved by their husbands, even without modern conversations about romance. Their contentment was real. My questions were real too. Both truths lived side by side. One aspect rarely understood from the outside is how privacy itself becomes a rule. Amish homes are full, children, relatives, sometimes grandparents under the same roof. Bedrooms are functional, walls thin, schedules early. This created an intimacy shaped by timing and discretion rather than spontaneity. I remember waiting until the house was fully quiet, listening for the last footsteps to settle. Even then, there was an awareness that privacy was temporary, never absolute. That constant awareness influenced how freely closeness could be expressed. Over time, I began to see that Amish intimacy rules weren't designed to suppress connection, but to contain it, to keep it aligned with humility, faith, and community order. Desire itself wasn't condemned, but it had to live within boundaries that protected collective values. When I eventually left the community, one of the adjustments I didn't expect was learning how openly the outside world discusses intimacy. Therapy conversations, books, podcasts, advice columns. At first it felt overwhelming, almost too exposed. I realized then how deeply silence had been woven into my understanding of closeness. Looking back now, I don't view Amish intimacy rules as simply restrictive or simply wholesome. They are structured, intentional, rooted in theology and survival. In a world without modern distractions, intimacy becomes less about personal fulfillment and more about sustaining family and faith continuity. That framework brings comfort to some and quiet tension to others. For me, the journey since leaving has been about separating duty from desire, obligation from emotional presence, not rejecting where I came from, but understanding it more fully. Even now, when I think about those early years of marriage, I don't feel bitterness. I feel tenderness for my younger self, for the women around me, for the way we tried to live faithfully within the only structure we knew. If you've never lived inside Old Order Amish life, it's easy to imagine intimacy there as either repressed or pure. The lived reality is more human than either extreme. It's shaped by rules, yes, but also by kindness, patience, fatigue, faith, and the quiet negotiations every marriage contains. And I've come to believe that understanding those nuances matters more than judging them. Wherever you come from, whatever structure shaped your understanding of closeness, there are always layers beneath the surface. Some comforting, some complicated, all deeply personal. And if you've ever had to unlearn or reinterpret what intimacy meant in your own upbringing, you're not alone in that journey.